Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good afternoon. My name is Mohas Rizan bin Mos. My student ID is 2021203152.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good afternoon. My name is Nur Farahani Zainati Bidisano Akmal and my student number is 2021687822.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nova Radiana binti Umar. My student ID is 2021497052.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Jasmine Adriana binti Muhammad Junaidi and my student ID is 2021455954.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Shasha Nabilah binti Shuhaimi. My student ID is 2021650402.
Thank you to everyone that managed to participate today, and thank you to Dr. Ahmad Faiz bin Yaakob for giving us time and space to discuss our topic today. Our topic today will be talking about the separation of power by Montesquieu and how it worked with our state Malaysia. Before we able to further do to our speech, I would like to inform that we were talking about the history of Montesquieu, the concept of separation of power, the fundamental and the function of separation of power, how it worked in Malaysia, and finally the advantages, and the importance of it. Without further, I would like to begin by talking about the Montesquieu history and the concept of separation of power. Montesquieu, or better known by his full name, Charles de Secours bar Montesquieu, is a great French political philosopher. One of his works known is The Spirit of Law, which was produced and published back in 1748. The Spirit of Law was one of his works that have been received very open and most welcome response, especially by the Great Britain and the American colony. This work of the Spirit of Law is also widely used as a source and the foundation, as well as the influence many of the founding fathers of the United States in shaping and drafting the U.S. Constitution. Montesquieu was born in 1669 at Château de la Baume in the hometown, in which is become his hometown. Montesquieu's father, Jacques de Secours, was a soldier who came from a modest military family that had been ennobled in order to serve the crown in the 16th century, while his mother, Mary Farchos de Passel, who is the daughter to Pierre de Passel and Maria de la Salle, she was a pious woman and a partial English descent. 7 years after the Montesquieu was born, his mother passed away and left Montesquieu and with his father in 1696. In the following year, in 70, Montesquieu was sent to the Catholic College of Julien, or also known as the College de Jules, which is not far from the parish, which is also where the Catholic College of Jules is one of the leading and the famous school for the child of French nobility. And this is because it was much prioritized by the prominent families such as the Baudoms and the member of Orton Grigli, which belonged to it, where there was responsibility for providing a good education and in line with the alignment and modernity. Later, Charles left Jules in 75 to pursue his education at the University of Bordeaux's Faculty of Law, where he graduated and became an advocate in 78. Shortly after, in 1730, his father passed away, and then the responsibility of looking after Montesquieu was given to his uncle, the Baron de Montesquieu. Later, in 1740, a year after his father's death, Montesquieu was appointed as the advisor to the Bordeaux Parliament, where he expressed his Protestantism of reference. He continued his life by marrying Jean de Latouche in 1750, and who is also a Protestant, and then there was being blessed by 3 children. Later on, 1760, the Baron, who is uncle to Charles de Secours Baron Montesquieu, died, leaving his wealth to Montesquieu as well as his title and the position of Montesquieu, the position of President Amonte in the Bordeaux Parliament, which is Montesquieu, will take over for the next 12 years as the President of Parliament of Bordeaux. At the age of 27, he was appointed as the president of the Bardem Parliament, one of France's most important parliament outside of Paris. He served as the chief magistrate in the Bardems for 12 years, but he was dissatisfied with the job because he was an avid reading of literature and history and has a strong sympathy with the intellectual movement of the day. Finally, he resigned from the president and decided to move to Paris in 1728. Soon later, he decided to travel the world, which is his visits such as Austria, Hungary, Venice, Rome, Switzerland, homeland, and England, where he spent more than 2 years. During his journey, he met many of England's top political and political intellectuals, and he was immensely struck by the English concept of liberty and the English way of life. Later on, he stayed down in La Brede after his return and kept himself really busy and occupied to writing and compose political philosophies. Although the France was still under the complete control of the King Louis at the time, it was more fertile for the development of political theory, but Frenchmen, like their counterpart across the Channel, were they dissatisfied with the political system. Now, I would like to talk about the concept of separation of power by Montesquieu. There's no denying that history and philosophies have a strong connection with science, politics, and have a period much that and provide much data and inspirations in the formation of development of nation and the government, which now is formed based on the idea and doctrine from the philosophies to achieve the human goodness without counting the skin color, race, religion, and belief, which have now been successfully employed through the existence of strong and stable government nowadays. This is including Montesquieu, where he believed that giving the opinion that to assure that human can able to thrive and to achieve the glories of human is where he find that human freedom and liberty is the key of the such progress. And to achieve that, he believed that the separation of power is the key to the freedom for human being and the key to fomentate the better and more stable government for the freedom and liberty of people. He explained his theory of separation of power in order to lay out the government structure in order to protect political liberty, in which he believed the best way to prevent dictatorship is through separation of power among the different government departments. Montesquieu also urged that each authority should be administered by a different organ. For example, the British Constitution are the best example embodiment of notion of separation power between the legislative, executive, and judicial part of the government, in which Montesquieu saw the separation of power was important and critical at that time in order to preserve the liberty. Montesquieu did not rely on the analysis to make his decision. He already learned to what aspect from the local and Hamilton. And for the reminder, he took the story and the meme that was popular among the English. Montesquieu explained there are three main and type of power which is playing an important role in established by the government, which is the first is legislative power, second is the executive power, and third is judicial authority. However, the separation of power is important because if there is no separation of power, there can be no liberty. When the executive and the legislative power are combined in one person, it can cause a sufficient amount merge. There will be no liberty if the count is not separate from the legislative and the executive power. When it's paired with the legislative power, people's survival and liberty are vulnerable to arbitrary authority. When it joins with the executive organ, it becoming a mortal god capable of violence and oppress. Now, to furthermore our discussion our topic today, I would like to pass to Ms. Farahani to explain the function of separation of power.
Thank you to Mr. Mohans for explaining the history of Montesquieu and the separations of power concept. Now I will explain about the separations of power a little bit more and how it functions. Even the separation of power is seen to be good, however, it's not enough to what it takes in build a better government, in which U.S. government have introduced a system called checks and balance during trade the U.S. Constitution, which help implement an interest. First and foremost, the three main power of federation is legislative. What I understand, legislative is making a law for the government and people on certain country to be obeyed with the law that been made it. Based on Montesquieu theory, legislative meaning is responsible to making a law of the state or the country. Legislative also to distribute the necessary money for country used for control and country. Montesquieu also stated that his legislative function was created. Among one of the functions of the legislature is to implement or make new laws or regulations. In addition, it also serves as an alternative to existing laws that have been made or serve to repeal laws that have been made for their own reasons and factors. According to Montesquieu, this involved general rules enacted to determine the structures of the authority's power over the rules that the people will face if they commit wrongdoing and errors on a matter. In addition, another three main power of federation is executive. In Montesquieu view, executive means is the legislative branch funded and enacted to be responsible in administering public policy and implementing it. Among the functions or roles of the executive according to this 18th century philosopher Montesquieu is as one of the bodies that formulates and follow all the government activities implemented by government policy. In fact, the executive function is very or has to become extensive. This is because this matter has involved almost all authorities, official or publicly. These executives involve the preparation and administration or regulations of the vast system of social service. In addition, the actual functions of the executive are more deeply the honorable or sovereigns as the main state or chief executive, members of government elected by the people to represent them and become members of parliament sit at the front. Beside the legislative and executive, another one main power of federation is judicial power. Based on Montesquieu perspective, judicial powers means they're responsible to explain the constitutions and the law and use interpretations of any conflict or controversies that occur to the people. This judicial, if we can look like a judge. This judicial power will explain about the law and resolve the assumptions made by the people as to why the law was created. Next, among the judicial functions in the federation, according to Montesquieu, is the court to explain some things whether facts and cases that are disputed by half the individual or society, as well as involving the law according to the law laid by parliament. In addition, judicial power plays as a role as a major factor in addressing a conflict that happens to anyone. This includes between such institutions and countries as well as between individuals. A professional judge appointed by the Honorable to adjudicate a conflict and conducted in the civil and criminal court. Based on the discussion, we can know all the three powers of federation that proposed by Montesquieu. For a summary of this discussion, that legislative is functions as lawmaking, executive function as law applying, and while judicial function as law enforcement. That's all my point. Now I will pass to Ms. Faradiana to continue this conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Farahani, for the discussion about the main power in Malaysia. Now, I will explain how separation of power works in Malaysia. The executive branch is the place where the federal government of the 13th state exercises its power. The Prime Minister Cabinet has executive power, and the Malaysian Constitution requires that the Prime Minister be a member of Parliament's lower house. The public will elect the executive branch, and they will have a significant impact on Malaysian political system. The Federal Constitution gives the executive power to manage and execute law. The Yang di-Pertuan Agong authority to rule is exercised by the Cabinet of Ministers. The Prime Minister, however, is the chief executive in keeping with idea of democratic rule. The Yang di-Pertuan Agong appoints a cabinet which is council of ministry to advise him on how to carry out his duties. It is made up of the Prime Minister and undefined numbers of ministers, all of whom must be members of the Dewan Rakyat or Dewan Negara. It is made out of the Prime Minister and an undefined numbers of ministers. Legislation in democratic government enact the general rules of the society in the form of law. Malaysia's parliament is the supreme legislative body. The House of Representatives and Senate are the two chambers. Its primary job is to enact, amend and repeal law. The Yang di-Pertuan Agong is the supreme head of the federation. As the constitutional head, the YDPA role is to advise the Prime Minister. He is entitled to any information regarding the federation administration that is available to the cabinet at his request. The power to pardon, approve and respite or of remitting, suspending or commuting sentences. The power to exercise based on the advice from the Prime Minister, the Cabinet and the conferences of rules. Yang di-Pertuan Negeri has some duration in performing the following function under the Federal Constitution. On the suggestions of the Prime Minister and after consulting the conferences of rules, the YDPA has the legal right to nominate the Prime Minister and other ministry. We also have Dewan Negara that is considered as the highest council in country. The Senate has 70 members, 26 of whom are chosen by the 30 state legislators and 44 by the King. On the suggestion of the Prime Minister, the King may dissolve Parliament at any moment. Dewan Negara has a Yang di-Pertuan and Timbalan Yang di-Pertua who has appointed to chair the meeting. Dewan Rakyat is a place where the citizens of the country could voice out their opinion through the various of representatives. Other than that, the Dewans must approve the bills with a simple majority for any public issues. Malaysia has unified legal system with all the courts having jurisdiction over both federal and state legislation. The majority of matters are handled by magistrate and federal courts. Islamic law and custom are resolved by religious tribunals. Administrative detention is allowed in security instance if procedural safeguards are forcibly suspended. Now, I will pass my discussion to Ms. Jasmine to discuss further about the importance and the advantage of separation of power.
Thank you, Ms. Farah, for explaining about the way of separation of power in operation in Malaysia. And thanks to Ms. Farahani for explaining the meaning and function of separation of power. Now, it is my turn to explain the importance and advantages of separation of power and the disadvantages of separation of power. I will start with advantages first. Here is some of the importance of separation of power. It can increase in government efficiency as power is distributed among government departments. These departments gain in-depth knowledge of the issues that they deal with and become more efficient. As example, they can remind and help each other to face the difficult situation and become more organized. They can also focus on their field of work and make their work be more quality of their work and be more powerful. At the same time, they can improve their scope of work. In fact, the system of politics can be more efficient and easy to take control. It is also a delegation of power to many people rather than a single person. It is preferable to distribute power to many people rather than a single person, because a single person will be tyrant and cruel to the people like the president of South Korea. As a result, many people who hold position in government will ensure that the people of various backgrounds and personalities are represented. Furthermore, it is hoped that in this manner, the government will not overlook all the people's cries and needs. For example, elected representatives from various factions such as B40, M40, and T20. In this way, they can avoid the opportunity people and will give each other suggestions and ideas to add to the existing shortcomings. Now, let's forward with the disadvantages of separation of power. If the governments want to separate the power, they need more cost on this because all of the three branches, have more than 1,000 people and need to pay their salary to operate. They have their own position, responsibilities, as well as salary grade that will determine how they are being paid. The higher position will get the higher salary and allowance. For example, the country council in Malaysia has 222 people and their salary range from 6,000 to 50,000 ringgit a month. Besides, this separation of power needs to take a long time in decision making. Government that practice separation of power in its administration will take a longer time to make decisions, make law, establish policy or programs. This is because every branch needs to take their time before making a decision and they have their own task in every decision of their governments. Involvement of many people in the decision of the government will make the process long. For example, if Malaysians are facing a food crisis, they need a plan to back up such as inflation and reduce import duties that need agreement from all branches. Furthermore, we know this separation of power also lacks cooperation because the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government all have different responsibilities. There may be conflict in the government. This is not good for the country. For example, the US Congress impeached the president due to a scandal and they did not defend each other because they were not from the same political party. This will have an unstable government. As we know, every 5 years we have election for a new government and keep changing before the people want to feel the way of governing. In fact, the legislative can also topple the executive branch down if there is any problem instead of breaking them. Lastly, people need to face their impact when they are having conflict. Next, they need. Well, I have reached my part. Now I will give it to Miss Shasha to give a conclusion. Thank you.
Thanks to Ms. Jasmine for explaining the advantages and disadvantages of separation of power, and thank Adam for explaining other important part in our topic. Now let me help refresh our topic again and begin to conclude our topic. As our topic are discussed about separation of power by Montesquieu today, we believe in order to understand the separation of power, we are all must willing to understand it mean and what are the elements that is important in order to create separation. It's obviously separation of power mainly in order to control and limit one power from become tyranny to other, as he have view and seek many systems of government, and finally stood up British Constitution, which soon born to concept of separation of power. Separation of power are very important because it mainly function of liberty of people and state itself. We can conclude that separation of power are one way to have in order to create a better and order government for its people and state itself. Which contain legislature, judicial, and executive. However, it also must have check balances system in order to ensure the separation of power are not misused, and separation of power keep its state and people safe and include the liberty people again as mentioned it before. In conclusion, we can say we must thank the philosophy Montesquieu who came out with concept of separation of power, and we must glad that our government nowadays are able to recreate the concept of separation in which have give us liberty to our state and our freedom will in live our life. We sure we will not be free and liberty if all power are in one hand and we can misuse power, especially a tyranny. Next, I will pass to Mr. Mohas to continue this presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Shasha, and thank you to the others members who have managed to participate to our topic discussed today. It seems that we have came to the end of our discuss. I hope that what we have been explaining by Ms. Farhani, Ms. Farah, and Ms. Jasmine, including Ms. Sasha, could eventually give us clear meaning about the separation power that by Montesquieu. And I hope that eventually enlarge more our deeper knowledge about the separation power and why it's important to us and to our nation, especially in order to build a good and stable government, which eventually does not oppress to its people. I guess this is the end of our video. That's all for us. Thank you.